Today we'll be discussing Hungary and its wines. Hungary has a long and storied wine history dating back to the times of the Romans. It does also have quite a complicated history just in general, due to migrating sort of borders, being part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire until the early 20th century, whether it be Roman occupation, or the Turkish Ottoman Empire occupation, Nazi occupation during the Second World War, and subsequently Soviet occupation up until as recent as 1994. So Hungary offers more than just Tokaj. So ubiquitous with Hungarian wine would be the sweet wines of the Northern Massif region, or the area district known as Tokaj. But for this purpose of the presentation, we will not be discussing it. We will, however, be discussing its fast wine culture. Most famous, other than Tokaj, would be the Eger Bikaver, which is a full-bodied red, as well as there's quite a few white wine-only districts within the country. So the country has 4 major regions that can be separated into. To the east, and comprising over 50% of the country's vineyards, would be the Great Plain, or the Alfold. To the west of that, comprising most of the west, would be the Trans-Danube. Just to the northwest, on the border of Austria and Slovakia, you'll find the Kiselfold, or otherwise known as the Small Plain. And to the northwest, you'll find the Northern Massif. So the Alfold, otherwise known as the Great Plain, is sort of the agricultural heart of the country. You guess it, Great Plain. It is a quite flat area, not particularly known for wines of any quality or renowned. This is sort of the production center of commercial wine for the local markets. It has over 50% of the country's vineyards, but during Soviet occupation, wine wasn't necessarily considered a thing to be prized, or was more considered to be just a commodity like potatoes or onions or anything else. So a lot of these plantings were either new or just carry over from the old Soviet sort of production. One thing to note about this area, due to its heavily sandy soils, it sort of provides a pretty inhospitable environment for phylloxera. So you'll see a lot of its plantings actually on the original Vitis vinifera rootstock and not grafted at all. The next would be to the west, comprising pretty much the entire western portion of the country other than the Kiselfold, is the Trans-Danube. Punctuated in the center by Lake Balaton, which has both red wine districts as well as exclusively white wine districts. Again, mostly relatively flat terrain with some small hills. You'll see more of that to the north or the south, bordering either Croatia on the bottom or just touching the southern portion of the Kiselfold. Speaking of the Kiselfold, so this is the smallest region producing wine within Hungary. It has 2 main districts. The first would be Sopron, and the second would be, sorry, I always have trouble pronouncing this, Fanohalma. Most famously from this region would be Kékfrakos Sopron, or Sopron Kékfrakos. It's reminiscent of a Beaujolais style wine, so it's light and fruity and fresh and meant to be drunk young. And coincidentally, the primary varietal within this wine would be Kékfrakos, which to everyone else in the world it would be known as Gamay. So the Northern Massif, this is where Tokaj, that famous wine that I talked about earlier on in the presentation, is located. This is just to the northwest portion of the country, just in the bottom of the Carpathian Mountains basin. It has 4 main regions, one of which being Tokaj, and the other 3 have very distinct wine styles, But this is where you'll find that bull's blood that Eger Bicaver produced, which is a rich, full-bodied red reminiscent of a Bordeaux blend. Coincidentally enough, most of the varietals grown in this area are Bordeaux varietals, as well as a few native Hungarians. As for appellation laws and wine production, the Eger Bicaver is one of the few wines that I've seen that actually have strict laws around its production. One of which has to have a minimum of 3 different varietals. Second, minimum aging for 12 months on oak. It doesn't specify what kind of oak. You do obviously see a lot of Hungarian and Slovenian oak around here, but there is a movement towards more French oak as well. After that, it must be marketed a minimum of 14 months after vintage, minimum. And then it must pass a rigorous testing committee, which is kind of known for flunking about 1/3 of the wine produced or submitted to this. So they do have quite a bit of high standards here. Again, where there's food, where there's wine, there must be food. So Hungary has a very rich culinary culture. I can speak to this in person, as I am half Hungarian. What you see on your screen right now is csirke paprikás, or otherwise known as chicken paprikás, my personal favorite meal. It is chicken cooked in a paprika cream sauce on top of nöködli, which is a homemade dumpling. If you're a fan of German cuisine, you might know it as a Spätzle. Hungarians like to eat, and they like to drink wine. And not only wine, they're very much into whiskey and various sort of aperitifs and digestifs. But yeah, the base of their culinary culture is heavily surrounded with paprika in various forms of smoked paprika, hot paprika, mild paprika. So you're sure to find, if you like pepper, it's going to be in pretty much any meal that you find in this country. That being said, Hungary has a very deep culture which to explore and contribute a lot to the world as a whole, whether it be from the invention of the ballpoint pen or the composer Franz Liszt. The list can go on and on and on. I hope you enjoyed this presentation and that I wasn't rambling too much. Thank you very much.